welcome back to my YouTube channel. Please continue to like, share and subscribe if you like what you hear. Currently up at 78 subscribers, so I really appreciate that. Really hoping to get to 100 as soon as possible. Here today to bring you a preview of Newcastle United's trip to Manchester City on Saturday night, and that'll come a bit later, but first a little bit of an update on the left back situation. So Newcastle are making a move for Lewis Hall of Chelsea, and that's taking a different direction in the last couple of days. Obviously in my last transfer update I spoke about Kieran Tierney and Marc Cucurella, with Lewis Hall a long-term target. That they've been interested in Lewis Hall for a long time, but there's not been any real expectation that Newcastle will be able to sign him, because Chelsea were expecting to send him on loan to Crystal Palace after signing him to a 6-year contract with a 1-year possible extension. So there was real hope for Chelsea, and as I tweeted yesterday, that they wanted to keep him, and that was the message. And I think what's really happened is that a sudden change in approach from them, and they're deciding to cash on him and see him as a way of offsetting the FFP situation that they're currently running the risk of over-egging in a sense because of all the spending they're doing. So it's an opportunity for them to cash in, a great opportunity for Newcastle to make a move for a player who they've, as I say, they've really liked for a long time. Fits the bill perfectly at left back. 18 years old, a Newcastle fan as well to boot, but can really good defensively, as I think he showed in long spells in his debut at St James's Park last November. Was probably Chelsea's best player, but so he doesn't really lack that defensive solidity, which is what I mentioned that Newcastle are wanting in a left back, as well as that ability to add the balance going forward that Kieran Trippier does to offset Kieran Trippier on the other side. I think it really makes sense in that approach. I was talking on the True Faith transfer show yesterday, and even at that point I was sceptical as to whether Chelsea would be willing to let him go as I was last night. I've woken up this morning to this news of a £30 million asking price, and the Telegraph reporting £28 million fee agreed. I can't stand that up myself at the moment, but I think it's a deal that would make sense for Newcastle if they could do it. That was the only issue I had with the possible chase for Lewis Hall, was the fact that I didn't think Chelsea would be willing to let him go. Chelsea fans are really upset at the idea of letting him go if they can get him, and I'm still a bit sceptical on what Newcastle can do, because the sort of messages for the last few weeks, as we know, Eddie Howe's been saying Newcastle will have to get creative with their spending, and whether but the truth is nobody really knows what that means. The message that was coming out of the club was loans with an obligation to buy, potentially a structured deal. I have no information on how Newcastle are going to get this deal done, whether they're going to agree a price, but they are not a club who tend to stick around for negotiations if they don't feel that they can get somewhere with them. So I think there's a real good opportunity for Newcastle to pounce here if they can take advantage of this situation with Chelsea. Up until a few days ago, Marc Cucurella and Kieran Tierney were the more likely options, apparently, because they were looking at what was available, and Lewis Hall was all set to go to Palace. He was all set to sign that contract, and this change of approach and this change of heart from Chelsea has really opened the door for Newcastle. So brilliant signing if they can get him over the line. Very similar to Tino Livramento at right back in terms of the type of player he is, in terms of his attitude, in terms of his ceiling as well. I think perfectly sets up Newcastle for those fullback positions for years to come, which has potentially been a bit of a problem, knowing what you were going to do after Kieran Trippier started to decline. And obviously left back has long been a problem, because Matt Targett has not been in the first team fold for a long time. Dan Burn offers something brilliant in a defensive sense, but they've had to get creative in an attacking sense on the left, and that's been a bit of a weakness. And I think going into the Champions League, they want somebody who can offer that attacking spark down the left. So it's a really, really good deal if they can get it done. As I say, I'm still a little bit sceptical about the structure of the deal, whether they can, how they're going to spin it. But what is clear is that Chelsea are willing to do a deal, which they weren't earlier in the week. And up until last night, as I say, I wasn't convinced that this was a deal that could be done. I think now it's a little bit different. My worry with Tierney and Cucurella were more about what they can offer in terms of Tierney's fitness and Cucurella's style. Both of those are not a problem with Lewis Hall. He's a perfect fit for Newcastle. He's a perfect fit for Eddie Howe, just like Tino Livramento, just like Anthony Gordon, just like Harvey Barnes. It's more of that really well thought out recruitment and expertly executed recruitment as well. And I think if Newcastle can get over the line with this, it'll be a really, really good deal. So moving on to Saturday's game at Manchester City. This is a game that Newcastle fans have got to go into with real confidence, and that's for the first time you can really say that at a ground like the Etihad Stadium. The history of this fixture is not great for Newcastle, even when they were in the Champions League 20 years ago, and Manchester City under Kevin Keegan were getting promoted. Latter days at Main Road, there weren't many good results. Early days at the Etihad as well, or City of Manchester Stadium as it was then. Newcastle were a much better team on paper than Manchester City, and they still struggled to win at that stadium. No victory at Manchester City since 2000. It's not even taken into consideration the recent gulf in class between the two clubs. In the other sense, Manchester City have been a dominant side, obviously in English football for a long time, Pep Guardiola and all that. Newcastle, though, are in a really good place. That win over Aston Villa on Saturday has really turned heads, and I know there's a lot of media discussion about it. Obviously, Sir Alex Ferguson has come out and said something quite interesting about Aston Villa playing Newcastle off the park, which I didn't really see personally. I think Aston Villa were, as I mentioned in that video, quite good for some spells, but they certainly didn't match Newcastle across the board for intensity or purpose throughout the game. Newcastle fully deserved the win, and also you take into account the pre-season predictions. You know, will a few of those have changed off the back of one game? One thing is for sure, Liverpool, Chelsea, Manchester United all looked a little bit sluggish at times. Newcastle have hit the ground running and improved on last season. They haven't just kept up what they were doing; they've improved, and I think, as I mentioned in that video, Sandro Tonali's made a real difference in midfield, and that's where Newcastle might finally be able to hurt Manchester City. With no Kevin De Bruyne for 4 months, there's a real opportunity there to have a real go at Manchester City. And I think Newcastle will be going into this game with a lot of confidence. A narrow defeat would previously have been seen as a success. I think a draw would be a fantastic result. A win would be a real statement. I think you've got to be getting a little bit ahead of yourselves if you're talking about it being a defining victory. I think it's a great time to play Manchester City, obviously off the back of that penalty shootout victory in the Super Cup last night against Sevilla. In Greece, they'll be tired. Pep Guardiola made a point of saying that again, as he has done, about playing on Saturday, not Sunday or Monday, which he would have preferred. That'll be an advantage for Newcastle, who've been working hard at this all week and looking forward to this game at the Etihad all week. In terms of the starting 11, I think Eddie Howe will be unchanged. I don't see any reason to change the way that Newcastle approach this game. I think midfield, as I've mentioned before, Sandro Tonali offers an extra bit of quality in a different phase of midfield. So Newcastle will be defensively structured against the pace of the attack in Manchester City, both out wide and in the centre. I think they'll play a slightly deeper line potentially, and I think that would be a sensible thing, because one player you don't want to get caught in behind it against is Erling Haaland. I wonder if they'll make some exceptions for that, but in terms of personnel, I don't see a reason to go any different. Alexander Isak will cause problems up front. Anthony Gordon deserves that start, even though Harvey Barnes came on and scored on his debut. I think Anthony Gordon was such a threat in the first half of that game that he fully deserves an opportunity to continue on that side. And Miguel Almiron obviously is kind of a shoo-in on the right of midfield. I think that one of the real reasons why Newcastle didn't go for a right midfielder is that improvement in Almiron, and that not just in terms of his goals. And I know a lot of people say that he doesn't offer too much when he doesn't score, but actually if you watch his game compared to earlier days under Rafa Benitez, but particularly Steve Bruce, when he didn't really have that much tactical instruction, I think this is a very different Almiron. His decision making is much better. I think he's going to be a real asset on Saturday. So I think Newcastle will go unchanged. Manchester City will be really interesting to see who replaces Kevin De Bruyne. And yes, I think Newcastle have a genuine opportunity to win this game, and certainly will cause problems. And Manchester City will not be happy about playing Newcastle after that result and after that performance on Saturday. And this is a real opportunity to make a statement against the team that everyone expects to win the Premier League title. You know, I think that's a little bit beyond Newcastle at this stage, but really they need to be making those statements in terms of being in that Champions League conversation again ahead of when the Champions League starts, obviously with the draw in a couple of weeks and the first game about a month away. I personally think Newcastle will get a draw out of this game. Manchester City are quite notoriously slow starters, just by their own standards, even though they do tend to win these games. I think that they'll be tired. I think what was interesting last night was Guardiola played a lot of the first team that he would pick in the big games. And I think he can't afford to rest a lot of those players. Missing De Bruyne there as well, so you've got tiredness, you've got injuries, and you've got that sort of that intensity and confidence that Newcastle will be going into this game. Last year they didn't play too badly, but they were just caught out by an early goal by Phil Foden. I think if they can make a good start, maybe get an early goal and put a little bit of pressure on Manchester City, it could be a completely different outcome. I think a draw would be a fantastic result, and I think it would really set them up for that game against Liverpool back at St James's Park. Once again, thank you very much for joining me on this video. Really hoping to get to 100 subscribers as soon as possible. It's a target for this week that I've really set, but I think that's going to be a bit of a push. But let's see how far we can go. I'll be back on Sunday morning to look back at the game. Cheers.